We are going to be talking to Mr. Steve Stockton, author of Strange Things in the Woods. Before I bring Steve, the author, on today, let's talk to my new co-host, Heather Osborne. Heather, great to have you on the show.
Hi, James. It's great to be here. I'm
Uh,
excited.
well, Heather has been a former guest on the show herself, and it's great to join forces with today, Heather. You excited about today's guest?
Sorry, what was that?
Are you excited about today's guest?
Yes, I'm very excited. I'm really interested to hear more about his background and how he got interested in all this. So,
Sure. Yeah, I guess this is your territory more so today, Heather. I know you're into some of this stuff as well,
right.
and your husband Gary. So
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
I'm kind of out of my depth today, but a great book. I really enjoyed a great book. I really enjoyed it. So let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Steve. You're very welcome to the show.
Hi, James. Hi, Heather.
Hi.
Hey, great to have you here, Steve. Steve,
You're
Great to
welcome.
be here.
you have also a second book since we last spoke, More Strange Things in the Woods. So I'll refer to guess I both books today, Strange Things in the Woods and More Strange Things in the Woods, the sequel. Um, Steve, tell us about you. Tell us about this research, or it's more of a collection of stories from people you know, I believe. And it's not even so much research. It's you've got a personal touch to this, I guess. You're affiliated with the people. So I guess tell us how that came about, first and foremost.
No, I grew up in the woods of East Tennessee. I was a late in life, unexpected baby, so a lot of my parents' friends were considerably older people. So when we went to visit, I would encourage the older folks to tell all the creepy stories, the tales about boogers and haints and things, if you will. And just there's a great oral tradition in the South, but a lot of people were somewhat reticent to talk about some of these stories just because they are so odd. So through that encouragement and through which the majority of these tales are from friends and from family members, just carrying on in the great oral tradition of the South, I've happened to write them down, and which I consider myself fortunate to be able to do. Otherwise, these tales could have died with me, and now at least they'll live on in some format for other people to enjoy and ponder and wonder about.
Sure.
Right.
I believe you got a paranormal event, if you want to call it that, in your childhood. Tell us a little bit about that, Steve. I think this is really interesting. This is quite hitting home for you, this one.
I'm assuming you're talking about the ghost
Yeah,
story.
yeah.
Yeah, I've talked about that one on some other shows. Yeah, I saw my first ghost when I was 6 years old. Full body apparition. We lived out in a semi rural area in East Tennessee. I was playing in the yard waiting for one of my neighbor friends, and by neighbor, he lived about a half a mile away. Waiting for him to come home. Lived at a T intersection, like an upside down T, and I see a car coming down the hill. I'm thinking it's my friend. When it stops at the intersection, I realize that it's not, but I observe a small child run out from behind the car, run across the road in front of the car, and I'm thinking that kid is going to get hit. This was a toddler, maybe only 2 years old, if even that. Runs down into our yard, and if you've ever observed real small children that have barely mastered the art of running, walking, when they start running, they will lose control and just simply crash and burn. Well, this child tripped, fell in our yard, and completely disappeared. I was
Oh my
about
gosh.
probably 100 feet from the spot. Our house was set about 212 feet off the road. I was in the middle of the yard. Did not take my eye off the spot.
Wow.
Walked directly to it, thinking there's going to be, a kid in a hole or something. There was absolutely nothing
Did that not
there. And
scare you, Steve? You're not
Right.
frightened?
it not so much as just like, that's not supposed to happen. Even as a child, I knew that wasn't right, and it wasn't so scary as much as it was just like, wow, there's something else afoot here. There are things, I'm not being told about or whatever.
Perhaps
Wow.
if that happened as an adult, Steve, maybe that would scare you, or that would scare the average person as an adult. I
Yeah,
think,
it scares me now to think about it.
in
Right.
retrospect.
Yeah.
Heather, do you
Yeah.
want to jump in for a question, Heather?
Yeah. So early on, then you were open to the possibilities of these experiences, then, if you were 6 years old. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's when it started. And I'd had some similar experiences before that, but nothing that had quite the impact that did of actually seeing a body, a person.
So, were the stories amongst your family and the neighbors and friends, were these common occurrences where you lived, where it was kind of more the norm to experience these things?
Uh, Sometimes I wonder if it wasn't more prevalent in the area. This The majority of the tales in the first book are in the East Tennessee and some of the foothills of Middle Tennessee around Fentress County, out near Nashville, in that area.
Right.
So I don't know if it just happens to be more occurrences in that area or if I was just tenacious in dragging those stories out of people. Like I said, everybody
Yeah.
wasn't ready to tell their story right away. Some of them I had to kind of drag it out of them with a log chain. And I think that was a lot of people feared, being ridiculed because some of the stories sound pretty fantastic
Mhm.
Yeah.
when you just take them for face value.
Let's talk about some of the stories. Strange Things in the Woods. You cover everything in there: UFOs, ghosts, cryptids, paranormal, and just damn right strange stories. Which I like that spectrum. I like that spectrum. It's not a ghost book. It's not a UFO book. It's strange, mysterious from everything that may be just like a normal event occurrence that just has got a lot of strange, bizarre elements to it. Um,
Yeah.
Tell us, let's jump in. Let's give some of the listeners something to bite into. Steve, tell us about some of the stories. What's the one that stands out for you most in the book, The Strange Things in the Wood? What was the one that hit home for you? The weirdest, the strangest, the most
Oh
shocking?
gosh, they're all my favorites. That's like picking a favorite child. But I would have to say some of the ones that had the most impact on me
Mm,
are the Flying Organ. That's the lead off story in the book. That was actually my uncles, two of my father's brothers that happened to. They lived way out in the country, Fentress County, near the what's now the Big South Fork National Park in that area of Tennessee. And we're talking nearest neighbor was several miles away, several miles to town. Well, they're out. It's summertime. They're playing in or near the creek, and they hear what sounds like an old church organ or a pump organ coming up through the hollow where they were playing. It passes directly overhead on a cloudless, clear day, and then continues over the ridge and out of hearing distance. And they couldn't recognize the tune, but they could recognize that it was playing a tune. And
wow.
Wow.
kind of shook them up, and they headed to the house. Can't say I blame them.
Yeah. That's not something you hear about too often, a ghostly sort of object flying overhead, especially. You hear about,
A
animals as you
musical
talk about in the
object,
book,
yeah.
and
And
yeah.
this was in the early days of the airplane and things. This would have been probably in the late 1920s, early 1930s. So
Mm.
it would just be hard to imagine anything flying and making an organ noise.
Wow.
Yeah.
Tell us what it's like growing up around Tennessee, because you're in Oregon now, I believe. Tell us what the terrain is like down there. Is this
Uh, in Tennessee, it's very hilly. There's a lot of Irish settlers and Scottish settlers in East Tennessee, and that's allegedly because it reminds them of home. So it's very hilly, very rolling. Uh, got a lot of lakes, a lot of outdoorsy type things like that. You got the Great Smoky Mountains and the Appalachian Trail not too far away. So Tennessee's a great place, especially rural Tennessee. There's big cities, small towns, and absolute desolate countryside there too. So it's a good place to grow up. You've got a little bit of everything. It's a good place for adventure.
did anybody give you any reluctance to give you the stories for the purpose of publication, or
A lot of them have passed on since they gave me the stories. But I've been collecting these since childhood.
Mhm.
So there are probably people that wouldn't be too happy that I published their story, but I went ahead and did it anyway. If nothing else, I've given them a legacy. I didn't name them. I mean, certain family members and friends would know exactly who I'm talking about when they read the stories, but the average person wouldn't be able to figure out exactly who I'm referencing.
Tell us a little bit about the cigar-shaped UFO. This one I think is awesome.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Yeah, that happened to my father, and it was the night that his father passed away. They were en route back to Fentress County. My dad was living in either Knoxville or Oak Ridge at the time, and on the way there, he observed this low flying cigar shape, just a classic UFO story. And this is something else I found with a lot of mountain folk. They tend to see things as omens or warnings or signs. And my dad took that as a sign that his father had passed away. And sure enough, by the time they got to where his father was, he had already passed. And he always said that he thinks that's why he saw the strange flying object, that it was letting him know that his father had passed on.
Wow. Wow. Heather, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I was really interested in some of the parallel stories of like UFO or unexplained experiences. One thing that really caught my eye were the similar stories of the glowing ball and the mysterious ball. And it kind of reminded me of, when you hear the stories about crop circles, that some people see like some kind of glowing, floating ball around these crop circles. And I wonder what your take on that was, what you thought the explanation could be for some of those stories of the glowing balls.
Yeah, the glowing ball, and I've had the privilege of actually witnessing the Brown Mountain Lights in North Carolina. And from what I gathered about the glowing ball story, it was that kind of almost like a swamp gas or an ectoplasm type, that type of glow. Seen moving through the woods at a very slow rate, like somebody carrying a lantern, but high enough up in the tree line that nobody could possibly get up there. And that's kind of the way the Brown Mountain Lights are. You see them at night when they're zipping through the canyon and stuff, and you think, oh, it's somebody with a light. But when you go back and look at that same area in daytime, there's sheer cliffs in there, and a person could not travel through there, period, let alone run through there with a lantern.
Right.
And then the giant ball, that's one of the strangest stories in the book. I think it was a blue and white striped ball about 3 or 4 feet high that just rolled up out of the trees and scared this young person. And he had no explanation for it, even into adulthood. He was still completely stymied and mystified. But it seemed to be cognizant. It When he yelled at it, he thought it was his brother. It actually rolled backwards a little bit, like it just noticed him, was pondering him. So that's really scary to me. A story
Yeah, it
like that.
is.
Mm. And this part of the world, I know somebody who has a black dog story, a friend of my father.
Uh,
So it's bizarre. Although this was an omen again, like you just spoke about, with the guy seeing a black dog, he was dead within 2 weeks. It apparently, even my dad, he doesn't take information lightly. He'll weigh you up on the merit of who you are and how you tell the story. But he said this guy seemed to be the most genuine. He was scared stiff, like for the last 2 weeks before he died. And because he probably knew his time was up. He knew what he'd seen was an omen. Um, he always spoke about it like for the last 2 weeks of his life that he couldn't get the image out of his head. But yeah, tell us about the black dog and that you wrote about, Steve, and omens like that.
Yeah, that one was not so much an omen, but just a weird encounter. It ended up the black dog was actually a good thing in that story. That was a cousin of mine, and he'd gone to Indiana to visit family, and being rather small and not used to that area, he got lost in a giant cornfield. And if you've ever traveled through the Midwest, there are cornfields that stretch for miles in either direction.
that's
You're
right.
driving down an old
Mm.
country road, everything looks the same on both sides of the road. He got lost. He couldn't find his way back. It's starting to get dark. All of a sudden, this huge dog, which he said he thought it was going to eat him or something at first, that's how big it was. And then it just gently kind of led him back to the road and in the right direction. And his father and uncle were out looking for him, happened to see him standing on the side of the road, and they asked him, how did you figure out how to come back this way? And he's like, well, the big black dog helped me. And they're like, what big black dog? And he's like, well, it was sitting right there by me until I got in the car, but they didn't see the dog. So it's
Mm.
almost a
Wow.
mythical beast like the black dogs that you hear about in the UK, but instead of being some sort of omen or portent or whatever, it actually led him back to safety and out of what otherwise could have been a tragic situation, perhaps.
Wow. Um, do you want to jump in there, Heather, before I go?
Yeah, there
Because
there are a lot of interesting animal stories in the books, and some of them aren't even necessarily supernatural or spooky, but just really interesting or touching. Like the imprisoned toad story where he set the toad free and the buried suitcase of the dog. And I thought that was a real sense of Americana, like capturing the folklore of things that happen in the woods that we don't really find out about. So I don't know if you wanted to share a little bit about what inspired you with the animal stories to collect some of those too.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. When you get out in the woods, you're going to encounter wildlife, whether it be frogs or hunting dogs or whatever. And yeah, that one, the entombed frog, it had gotten into a Coke bottle, apparently as a pollywog or a tadpole, and had grown up enough that it was trapped in there. Couldn't get out the hole, but had got enough water and enough sustenance to continue to live. And they were able to shatter the Coke bottle and safely get the frog out. And
Right.
then the other story, I know that guy very well, and he thought he had found a buried treasure or some drug money or something, a aluminum type briefcase wired shut and buried under a flat rock. He opens it up, and there's a skeleton of a dog in there, along with a laminated note to Brewster, the best hunting dog that ever was. So that, to me, that just, like you said, that's a slice of Americana there, that somebody
Right.
loved their hunting dog enough to carry him in a suitcase miles back into the woods where they used to hunt and bury the dog in his favorite hunting place. That is very touching,
Exactly.
and that's why it's in the book. Even though it's not supernatural, it is kind of strange, and as much as it's not something you would encounter every day.
I think that's what I like about it.
Right.
It's not just all
Yeah.
natural stories. There's some strangeness, just sheer strangeness in there as well.
Yeah.
Who doesn't like a strange story? But uh, I've had Nick Redfern on a few times talking, cryptozoology, and it's something that really I find fascinating. Tell us some cryptozoology stories. Anything fascinating in that realm?
Well, there are some Bigfoot-like stories in there about some sort of cryptid or hominid that has attacked campers or uh, chased kids in the woods. And again, don't necessarily know that it's Bigfoot, but it was something. I've had some similar encounters myself in the Great Smoky Mountains, where I've heard the yips and the yowls. I've had stones thrown at me, but I've never actually had a visual encounter. I would love to see a Bigfoot. And now that I'm out here in the Pacific Northwest, this is Bigfoot country out
Mm.
here.
Yeah.
Still looking, but I haven't seen anything yet, but I would love to.
People describe having an eerie shriek or some sort of an audible sound that doesn't sound human but doesn't sound like an animal. Is that what they describe? Is that the accurate statement?
Yeah, that's and based on what I've heard, it's somewhere between a howl and a shriek, and almost like maybe an ambulance or some type of siren, but with an animal or almost human element in there. Somewhere between a scream and a shriek. It's very hard to articulate into words. It's like
Mm.
trying to describe a color almost, but once you've heard it, you won't mistake it for anything else.
Wow. It seems bizarre that we could have a hominoid, rambling around, well, North America and the continent, whatever. But the amount of forestry that you guys have over there, the amount of terrain that and habitat, I think it's enough. It's enough to hide a hominid. I definitely think, and it's
Yeah.
well, more than anything, living in Oregon, Steve. It's pretty much uncharted territory. Most of the forestry. There's only dedicated routes, I imagine.
Yeah, you get off the trail sometimes even just a little way. You can easily get into places where people may have never been or haven't been in a long time. There's a lot of untamed wilderness out here. I mean, just miles and miles and miles of it. And you look at some, I don't know if you're familiar with David Paulides'
Oh
work or
yeah.
not, but about people disappearing in national parks. And you think, how could that happen? But then you go into some of these national parks and you see just what a vast expanse of wilderness it is. And you're like, okay, I can see how just, a few feet off the trail and you're gone forever, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, I think statistically he's investigated the number of missing cases in national parks. Is that right? And it's like the quantity
Yeah,
is the quantity is ridiculously high. Yeah.
yeah. Initially, 411 cases was what he found, and I'm not even sure how many it is now. It's even beyond that. But he's got an excellent series of books called Missing 411,
Hmm.
and then they're working on a movie. They're trying to get funding to finish that, and it's just some of the stories are incredible. Some of those hit really close to home, especially the Dennis Martin case. I don't know if you're familiar with that one or not. Young boy that went missing in the Smoky Mountains in the late 1960s, and I was actually about the same age as Dennis Martin at the time. So that one really hit home to me as a kid and gave me almost a fear but a respect of the mountains. So that's made me always careful when I was out in the Smokies or on the Appalachian Trail.
Tell me how the book's been received, Steve. Obviously, you've gone to a second book, More Strange Things in the Woods. Obviously, there's a taste for this out there, but how's it been received into the public? Have you got
Yeah,
feedback?
it's actually just it took off. I struck a chord or a nerve or something in there. Like I said, there's the paranormal side, there's the nostalgia side, there's just the strangeness, the creep factor. There's really something in there for everybody, and I think that's where the broad based appeal comes from. And it's written in such a way it's not hard evidence or hard research as much as I'm just telling the tales the way they were told to me and presenting it the way it was presented to me. Here it is. I'm not going to vet it or try to prove or disprove it, but take it or don't. But I think that's the appeal to people, that there's so much there and so many different instances and different types of occurrences and stuff. And yeah, I've actually got enough to fill a third book, and I'm currently at work on that one because these two have been received so well. I have my email address in the book, and I'm very active on Facebook and other social media. And I get people contacting me wanting me to tell their stories. So it's kind of a self-perpetuating series now.
Wow. Heather, you want to add to that?
Yeah, it just reminded me when I started to read it, it reminded me of stories when I was in the Brownies and Girl Scouts growing up, the kind of stories you tell around the campfire. And it's just an amazing collection. And we talked earlier about the Americana aspect. But another thing I'm really impressed by is the inclusion of the Native American legends and the folklore and the mound sites, et cetera, that you include in there. And so often we see a division in literature between, Native American stories and mythology and then American or Americana folklore. And one thing I loved about it is it seems like the woods and the landscape is this central theme that brings everything together the way you constructed the stories and people's experiences. So was it
Yeah,
something that was a part of your upbringing and the area, that Native American legends was really part of the culture then?
It was. In fact, I have Cherokee in my family. My dad's grandmother was full Cherokee. So I was taught from a young age to uh, respect and understand their beliefs, although it's not anything that I follow personally. I am aware of it. And it's something that, especially the wood lore and the legends and the superstitions and things like that, it's kind of obvious once you get out in the woods where those tales that they told originated from. And they
Right.
have very similar things. There are a lot of cryptozoological uh, type beasts within the Native American lore, things similar to the Sasquatch and things in lakes that eat deer. And I can't think of the name of the mythical animal there, but there's a lot in the Indian lore that's and also a lot of the place names. A lot of the Native Americans tended to shy away from certain places, and if you look throughout the United States, there's a lot of people or a lot of places that have names that would try to push you away from somewhere. Hell's this or devil's that, and a lot of that actually stems back from places that the Native Americans shunned, and then the white settlers gave it those names to kind of warn other people away from it. So there's things out there that we don't quite grasp or understand.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
definitely.
Can you give us an example of some of the Native American lore, in Pacific Case?
Well, there's one in particular, that one story I really enjoyed, and I was actually able to go and check this one out. It talks about a large tree, and this is down in Loudoun County, Tennessee, near the Sequoia Museum. Sequoia was the originator of the Cherokee alphabet, basically brought written language to the Indians and Native Americans in that part of the country. And just outside that museum, there's a burial mound there that has the remains of, I'm guessing here, but I think it's probably 100 or so Native Americans interred there in the mound. Well, if you continue in the woods behind the mound, there is a giant tree back there. And the story's in the book, but the person that told it to me was just so enamored of it that I had to go and check it out myself. But it looks like a Disney tree. It's like a tree times 10. It's so real that it doesn't look real. It's obviously got to be easily 500-600 years old. And there's just a feeling that you get there, that I got, even being part Native American, that this was somebody's power spot and I didn't really belong there. So I was very reverent while I was there and got out as soon as I could. I definitely felt like I was being watched. There was just a sense of some sort of power or something supernatural there.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
In the ghostly geese also, there's an experience in there with the mound where the boys trying to dig at the mound. Could you
Yeah,
explain a
that
little bit
was
about that story?
one of my father's distant relatives. There was they were hauling ash from the Native American fire pits to put on their garden out from under a bluff where the Native Americans had lived there in that part of Fentress County. Well, the son, the younger one, gets the idea, well, it's too far to the bluff. I'll only go half the distance. I'll stop here at this mound. He knew it was a burial mound, but
Right.
he was getting the dirt out of there and bringing it back to put on the garden. And he was the one who encountered, he said it sounded like a flock of geese in a circle around him, and it got louder and louder and louder. And he felt like that was a warning, like, don't get any more dirt from the burial mound. So he knocked it off and didn't have the experience anymore after that. I think another time he heard some chains rattling or something, like stuff to just, frighten the pants off of him to keep him from doing whatever he was up to.
Right.
Wow. Tell us a little bit about the story. I think this is instrumental that not every story has its supernatural ending, and the light in the coffin, that sometimes things can be explained too, that it's not all illustrious.
Yeah, I've got a lot of really good response from that one. A lot of people say that's one of their favorite stories in the book, even though it has a very happy, very non-supernatural ending. That was a fellow that my dad worked with. My dad worked in Oak Ridge as a part of the Manhattan Project during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And so he knew a lot of interesting and diverse people, because people came from all over to work in Oak Ridge. And this particular guy was a very country person, and his son had gone out, I think they were hunting raccoon or maybe possum, and he was on his way home and saw what he thought was a blinking light in a coffin off in the woods. And it shook the guy up. Again, these were superstitious, not so much mountain folk, but very country folk that believed in omens and portents and warnings and things like that. He saw the light in the coffin, and it shook him up so bad that he was shaking and in tears when he got home. And he told his dad, I saw this coffin with a light in it in the woods. I'm going to die. He was convinced that he would be dead before morning. And his dad apparently wasn't quite as superstitious and convinced him, like, let's go back and look at it. And what they found was half of a rotted log with a spider web in one end, and there was a firefly or lightning bug caught in the web, and that's what was flashing. And just the right angle, the right shadow, lack of light, and it looked like a coffin with a light in it. So the guy was relieved and did not die. But his father said that he thought if he hadn't taken him back out to see what it really was, that the guy would have convinced himself to the point that he would have been perhaps dead or even gravely ill by morning.
Wow. It's funny because I live in an 18-acre forest at the edge of it anyway, and I do walk early mornings and I do walk evening times, and you just have this different eerie feeling. There's the mist coming off the ground, the sun rising, dusk dawn. It does set the tone sometimes, it just sets the tone. So I can see that. Heather, do you want to jump in there before I go again?
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things I wanted to ask you, Steve, about the issue of the woods, because how much of this is just our psyche playing games because of the fear we have about going into the woods at night, and how much of this is attached to landscape with real phenomenon going on? Do you think it's like 50-50, or how would you surmise that?
Well, there is a different psychological aspect to it there. When you are in the woods, you're out of your element. If you're especially a city dweller or whatever, then suddenly you're in this huge forest. It's dark, it's creepy there. I've been in forests that were dark even in the daytime just because of the canopy. And I think that does play into it. It may heighten the senses or heighten the awareness. But then I only think that's a part of it. I think there really is something in the woods. I don't know if you want to call it a certain spirit or a certain energy, but I've spent a great portion of my life in the woods. I've been an outdoorsman from the time I was a child, and there are some places that just don't feel right. I've encountered some places, especially in the Smoky Mountains. There was a time that I went off the trail just a little ways, and it was just like there was something that just was trying to convince me just to sit down or lay down and maybe go to sleep or take a rest or something. I'm like, no, I don't need to stop here. I need to keep going. And then when I forced myself to get back on the trail and hike away, that feeling went away. So there's some unexplainable stuff out there too. So I'm thinking maybe 50-50. That's as good a factor as any.
Right.
We're just coming up to break, so just for the webpage, you can go to capricornradio.com for the free archives and capricornmembers.com for the HD TV and MP3 archives. But for now, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be back in just a moment. There is something majestic in the land of Ireland. This is known the world over. The Celtic Irish are descendants of the Tuatha De Danann, a mysterious, supernatural race of gods written about in ancient Irish Gaelic texts. This is the basis for all Irish mythology, and our megalithic ancestors are interlinked with these peoples. You have a chance to come and see these monuments and temples for yourself. The megalithic landscape is rich in the realms of myth, legend and wisdom. Come see all this on the most spectacular Sacred Sites tour in March 2016. The Sacred Sites and Equinox tour is not to be missed. Tour highlights include Grinning of Aillock Observatory, the Giant's Ring Henge and Dolmen, St. Patrick's Day Special at St. Patrick's Ancient Chair, March 17th, Knockmany Passage Tomb linked to the Queen Maeve with special access, Beemore Temple Complex, Dunluce Castle, the Giant's Causeway, Beltany Stone Circle, Kilclooney Dolmen, and the Loughcrew Equinox Event Alignment. Of course, we will see the famous tombs of Newgrange, Noath and Doath, also Fornox Rock Art and Shamanic Chamber, Tara Hill Complex, and we're going to finish at the Tuatha De Danann's origins in the northwest of Ireland at Carrowkeel, dated 3500 BC, and the famous Carrowmore 5000 BC complex. Check out all the full itinerary on the tours events page for more details at jamesswagger.com. Welcome back to Capricorn Radio. This is your host James, and don't forget to check out the archives at capricornmembers.com. You can subscribe for membership, doing a lifetime membership deal at the moment. And of course you can still check out the free archives at capricornradio.com. And then HDTV shows as well on the Capricorn members page. But for now...
Oh, so I just wanted to pick up on that, the humorous aspect of the explainable occurrences, like that some of them are explainable, like the man in the well. That was a really funny story. I enjoyed that one if you could explain that one a bit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just it placed a dummy in there to try and scare somebody, and it did. It scared them too much. It's just one of those things that, again, country people, they didn't have a lot to do. This was before television. Radio was a novelty. So you kind of make your own fun sometimes, and I guess, scaring the grown-ups would be part of that fun. I've heard my great-grandmother tell a story that when she was a little girl, there was a story going around, a rumor that there was a rabid dog in the area. And she talked about how she spent all day working around behind her mother, who was washing dishes or washing clothes outside in a big wash tub, get around behind her so she could sneak up on her and pinch her on the ankle and make her think that this rabid dog had bitten her. And she did, and the mother actually jumped over the tub, turned it over, and had to rewash all the clothes by hand. So my grandmother, her mother didn't find it too funny. She got punished for that one. So there is a kind of country humor like that
yeah,
everybody might not appreciate, but it was just, you had to make your own fun. Sometimes you had to do whatever you could do to retain your sanity.
Before we had horror stories, right, on the movies, like the Halloween stories.
Yeah.
Steve, where can people find copies of your books and find out more about you? Just take a moment to give that out while we're on.
Sure. Right now, they're available exclusively on Amazon as Kindle ebooks. There's paper copies of each of the books on the way. That'll probably be within a couple more months or so. And then after that, be able to get it in different areas, anywhere that you can order books or purchase books. I hope to get it in Powell's, the biggest bookstore on earth, which is right here in Portland. We've got over 1 million books on the floor. One of my favorite places to go. I can spend the day in there. I'm active on social media, Steve Stockton on Facebook. Mm-hmm. I'll accept anybody as a friend. I've got about 4,000 friends now, I think.
Wow.
On Twitter, I'm Strange and Odd, at Strange and Odd. And again, I tweet, paranormal things, strange things, weird things, retweet a lot of stories and things. And my email address is in the back of my book, Steve Stockton, and the number's 81@gmail.com. I love hearing from my readers. I love hearing those strange stories.
Gotcha. Um, Steve, what's different about More Strange Things in the Woods Part 2? Do you concentrate in any other particular area in that, or is it
It's
a continuum?
it's probably a little darker. There's not as many humorous stories, and uh, a lot of the ones in this one are ones that I heard or received after the first one came out.
Hmm.
And it seems like the favorite ones people like to retell are the ones that are scarier and have a little bit more darker edge to them. And this one is not as southern centric as the first book. There's stories in this one from New England and California and places like that. So it's a little more diverse in areas of the country, but some of the stories are just as strange and frightening.
Tell us about some of the ghost stories and any interesting ones that you might find the most interesting anyway, ghost stories.
In the new book, there's one that I really like about the a ghostly school bus, where this guy was out in an old quarry and he came across a school bus in a blackberry thicket, and he makes his way into it. I think he was hunting and he had a rifle with him, and he's just kind of checking it out. He goes toward the back of the bus, and it's decrepit and obviously been there a while. And he hears voices. He hears somebody coming, so he kind of hides in the back of the bus. There's two young girls that come onto the bus, sit near the front, and have a conversation. I think they were even. Uh, I would have to go back and look at my own book to refresh my memory, but I think they were drinking coffee or something. And he thought, this is really odd. So he just stays out of sight because he's got a rifle. He doesn't want to scare these two little girls. Eventually, the conversation stops. He looks, the two little girls are gone. There's no sign of them. He leaves, goes home. Well, he comes back sometime later, I think it's a few weeks later, to check on it, and he's able to locate the blackberry patch, the brambles there, but there's no bus there. It's like there was never a bus there. So he's trying to conjecture if the bus was itself was a phantom, and he feels like the little girls were some sort of apparitions or specters or something. Very interesting story, but the guy was just the most sincere person. It's not anyone that I personally know. That's why I'm not as familiar with the story.
Hmm.
But I said he was just so sincere. I didn't have any reason to doubt him.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. You want to jump in, Heather?
It just brought to mind also the story about the taxi cab, which was unusual, that was left in the middle of the woods. Also, the parallel to that, if you could explain a little bit
Yeah,
about that
that
one.
one. I don't know that there was anything ghostly, but just the fact that how did a taxi cab get so far out in the woods? Was miles out in the woods. Again, this was somebody that I knew from Oak Ridge
Right.
that had encountered this taxi cab, and he didn't remember what the fares were that were painted on the door, but he said based on the low amount that it was, that the cab would have had to have been from like the 1940s, 1950s, something like
Wow.
that.
Yeah.
And this is in the middle of the woods. There's no roads in or out. It's up on basically the side of a mountain. And how did the
Yeah.
taxi cab get up there? It's interesting. Sometimes you see things like that. I've come across things like that in my own personal experiences being out in the woods and stuff. I've seen
Right.
bicycles up in the top of trees. And there's a very interesting story in the new book called Surfs Up about a guy that observes a surfboard falling out of the sky. And this, again, was right on the Tennessee-North Carolina border, miles and miles from the coast. But the only conjecture is that it was picked up by some sort of storm and blown up into the
Wow.
clouds, traveled along the
Yeah.
jet stream. And the guy had the surfboard until, I don't know if he still has it or not, but he kept it for a long time.
People
It's
just love
amazing.
mementos, don't they? People just love a
Yeah.
memento. Wow. Um, Tell me about the tarot cards in the forest because this I find
Oh,
these
yeah.
things. I think people go to forests to do weird things. I
That's
do.
right.
I do think people.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of that before, and you don't know if it's like, heavy metal kids just messing around or if it's truly somebody intent on something evil. But I've seen things like that, very similar to, almost cult-like activity. And yeah, the tarot cards, that was a person that I'd worked with in Oak Ridge back in the 80s. Uh, observed all these tarot cards nailed to trees, and they would walk to where one was, and then they would see another off in the distance and go to that one. And they finally got the feeling that, I probably don't need to be following these because I don't know if it's trying to lead me to somewhere, and if so, for what purpose. And they assumed it would be something nefarious and decided not to follow through.
Yeah.
And the part that I would have loved to have known is what the individual cards were, and then try to interpret those into a reading, either a 3-card spread or Celtic Cross or something like that, just to see if there was a message there.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have astrology cards, I have tarot cards, I'm into all that. But if I found them in a forest nailed to a tree, I wouldn't be hanging around
Right.
personally to do any
I
analysis.
agree. Anytime I've ever came across an area like that, I got out immediately. It was just not for me.
Yeah. Um,
I've seen too many horror movies. Like in the '70s, you had like Race with the Devil. I don't know if you ever saw that, where the people were camping in the national park and came across a satanic ritual, and then the Satanists actually chased the people, and the end of the
sure.
film killed them. So,
Yeah.
yeah, no thanks.
Yeah, I'd lived in Cornwall a long time ago now, about 10 years ago, but in the UK, and there's a forest down there, I think it's richly used by witches, and it's red strings hanging from trees with twigs on the end of it and markings on the trees, and the forests down there are ritually used, probably in a bit pagan traditional sense, but I think this forest can be used for good things too. And like you say, I think there's definitely a sense of I feel that there's a sense of spirit in the forest. There's nature spirits there that people want to be affiliated with. There's a good reason for them to go and do that too, I guess.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got people that believe wholeheartedly in fairies or earth spirits, such as elementals and things like that, which I don't discount. I mean, it's not a part of my belief system, but I can see how it could exist on that level. I believe in a lot of different things just based on what I've seen and the earnestness of people, the stories they've related to me. So there's not everything has a scientific explanation, and I don't know if you're familiar with an author who was prevalent in the '60s, John Keel. Wrote a book, The Mothman
Oh
Prophecies,
yeah, the
about the whole
Mothman, yes.
Mothman
Right.
ordeal. Well, he often talked about a lot of the Fortean events that you read about, like the rains of frogs or things like that. The Fort wrote about rains of flesh and blood and things like that. And Keel sort of, I don't remember exactly the way he said it, but I'll paraphrase him, that sometimes those things are only meant for one specific person or certain people, and the rest of us just, or part of us just happen to witness that.
Mm.
And he sort of alluded to the fact that maybe it was witchcraft, maybe it was some sort of other goings on, something that somebody had conjured up. Person A conjures it up, person B happens to witness it and don't really understand what they're seeing. And that kind of made sense to me in a left hand sort of way.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, there's also that there's a forest I think is at the bottom of Mount Fuji in Japan. There's a suicide forest there where
Suicide Forest,
they
yeah.
find 100 bodies every year, and 100 bodies they find every year where people flock there to kill themselves. So, why do you think that is, Steve? Do you ever think about that? Do you think that there's certain
Uh,
forests or certain energy points?
I've watched some documentaries about that. I've actually been to Japan. I did not go into that forest because I didn't want to find any bodies, because apparently they're, like you said, they find so many there that you can just happen over one. Um, but I think it's the desolation of the area is part of it,
Yeah.
just because it's a very dark, very quiet wood, from what I understand. Even it's one of those places, because of the canopy, even in the daytime it's dark.
Hmm.
So it would definitely have that aura. And then I think also, like you were talking about, certain earth spirits and earth energies and things, there's a dark energy there. There's something that draws those people there, something that maybe doesn't have a scientific explanation when we're getting off into the realm of the paranormal or the unexplained.
Hmm.
There are places like I've talked about. There are places that just do not feel right. I used to have a timeshare over in Middle Tennessee near a town called Crossville, and to get there, I had to go down this one particular road, and there was a house that I had to pass that set quite a ways back off the road. And I would always get the strangest feeling driving by there. I would kind of get goose flesh, and just something about that house didn't feel right. Well, the guy that sold me my timeshare was a regular real estate agent, and I asked him about this particular house on this particular road, and he's like, "Oh yeah, you don't want anything to do with that." And there was a like a triple murder suicide thing there years ago, and somehow I was picking up on that. Now I don't know if I'm just particularly sensitive to it, or if it was the energies coming off the house. But there are things like that give off an aura, that give off an energy that maybe it's a residual energy from the tragedy that happened, or maybe there was already something evil there. I know we're getting into the horror movie territory here, but it's interesting to think about. Good food for thought.
I know in that suicide forest, it's not just bodies that they find. There are markings on the trees as well. There are bizarre rituals that have gone on too. There are just plain ordinary suicides too. But like you say, perhaps there's just a place people flock to. Perhaps it's there because of some geographic reasons as well as the location and the dark canopy. Perhaps it's just a private place to do it. You know, I do think though that there's energy centers. I think Japan's got some weird energy there. They have the Devil's Triangle there, like the Bermuda Triangle too, in the seas, and there's a lot of people speak that there's energy centers in Japan that are just plain strange and weird. Um, do you
Have
hear
you
any?
thought about doing? Oh,
Sorry,
sorry,
no,
James.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just going to ask you, Steve, following up on that, have you thought about doing a book about stories from other cultures? Because I see so many parallels, like what James is pointing out here too, but like within Irish tradition
Mm.
and the Druidic experiences and the landscape there. Have you thought about incorporating other
Um,
cultures
in,
too?
in fact, I have, and that's one of my favorite things to do is travel. Back in the early 2000s, I spent a little over a year in Southeast Asia just on my own, just exploring. And there's probably a book there. Uh,
Yeah.
that's another thing, almost like with the country people. A lot of the Asian cultures, particularly the Thai and the Malay and the Filipinos, they believe in ghosts and spirits. So where I lived in the Philippines, I had a maid, and she would shut the windows at night and lock them because there were witches in the trees. And she genuinely believed this. She was young, maybe 18 or 19 years old, but she genuinely believed. And there's other
Yeah.
things, multos, which is their version of ghosts, asawang, which is their version of vampire, except their vampire splits at the waist. The bottom half, the legs stay in one place, the top half flies around, and
Oh
instead of
my
fangs, it
goodness.
has a pointed tongue that it drinks blood with. And in order to kill it, instead of a stake through the heart, you have to find the bottom torso and pour salt in it, and then it can't rejoin and it dies. So there's some very very cool stories from that part of the world, and
Wow.
so that's
Yeah.
probably another book. There was an island that I visited in the Philippines called Siquijor, which is also known as the Island of the Witches, and there are just so many strange things there. I could do a whole book, probably even a documentary about just that island. There are some very strange
Wow.
places in that part of the world.
Bizarrely, I'm going to the Philippines this December.
Wow, awesome.
Well, I'm doing best man for my brother, but we are going to be there for about probably 3 weeks. I actually, you might be affiliated with this. I don't know if you know Nan Madol in the Pacific. There's a temple in Ponape. But when I'm in Manila, I'm going to fly out to the island of Ponape. It's in a 10-hour flight probably from Manila, but it's in the middle of the Pacific, in the middle of nowhere. But there's strange lights there at this megalithic temple. At nighttime, the locals won't even go there.
Yeah,
It's
I've
almost like
heard
the
about it, but haven't been there.
yeah, it's almost like the ball lightning that you described. I wonder, is there some sort of a plasma energy that comes off the crystalline rocks or something that makes that happen? But it's bizarre that the locals will not go there at nighttime. Once it's dark, they don't go there. So I don't know if I
That
want
was
to
the
go.
way it was with CKR. Um, the locals, a lot of them won't come out of their houses at night. People from the neighboring islands wouldn't go with me. I tried to hire some people to go with me, and they wouldn't. They told me a lot of stories that there were kangaroo type animals and things that would come out at night and try to eat you, or even heard things that the locals would poison your food and then try to sell you an antidote. And just, yeah, people from other islands wouldn't go to that island, and the people on that island were somewhat reluctant to even come outdoors at night. But like I said, I saw some really strange things there that were unexplainable, and I'd like to go back and explain more. They've got a temple there where they have the saint is called Black Mary, and it's this really, if you Google it, you can find it, Black Mary, Philippines, and it's this really weird statue that they claim gets out and walks around on the island at night, and that would be enough to keep me inside if I thought I was going to see something like that, I think. But
Wow. Wow. I think the most important thing that Heather picked up on is that no matter what country or continent you're on, that there's a lot of this stuff is inherently in each culture.
Right.
It's there, variations and stuff. But fascinating to hear this stuff, Steve. I guess we're going to wrap things up, guys. Heather, you any final thoughts?
I'm just really impressed by your book, Steve, and I thank you for coming on and sharing with us, because I've learned a whole other set of folklore that we don't really hear about, and I think it's important for that to be recognized and honored. So I thank you for doing that for the American culture, and I hope you go on and explore other cultures too. I think it'd be really fascinating from what you're talking about.
thank you for having me, and thank you for the kind words and the encouragement. I appreciate that. Like I said, I basically wrote these down for myself, and it just happened to be something that other people love and enjoy. I didn't want the stories to die with me. I remember all the stuff that my grandma told me, and then being at her funeral and looking at her in her coffin and thinking, all those stories, if I don't repeat them, they die with her right there. They're buried with her. I mean, granted, there
Right.
could be other family members that know them, but for some reason, I feel like I'm the one that's the scribe. It's up to me to tell them, or they don't get told. So, but I appreciate
Exactly.
that, and I've got other books in the works, including one I'm working on right now that's full of just my own paranormal experiences, which it's going to
Yeah.
be a wild ride.
Wow. Well, Steve, it's been a pleasure talking to you today. Today's author is Steve Stockton, Strange Things in the Woods, a collection of true weird encounters, Volume 1, and you can catch Volume 2, More Strange Things in the Woods. Steve, it's an absolute pleasure talking to you today. Heather, great to see you on the show as well from my new co-host.
Great. Thank you. It's been a lot of
Thank you,
fun.
James. It's been a pleasure for me as well.
Okay, guys, I stopped the stream at that. Awesome. Right on the hour.
That's
Great.
a good deal. That was a lot of fun. Thank you.
It
Oh,
was.
good show.
Thank you, Steve.
No, I really enjoyed that. Heather, great style, great questions. I'm really glad you're on the show with me today. So,
Thank you. Well, you
uh,
make it easy, and Steve makes it easy too. Great
yeah.
stories. I mean, just
If
really
there's anything I
fascinating.
enjoy more than writing my stories, it's sitting and talking about them. So
Yeah.
this is great for me.
You'd be the best person to have around a campfire.
For sure. Okay. Listen, guys, I just want to go and check that. Steve, what I'll do is I'll do the rest via email. Do I have your email? You
I
called it out on the
don't know
show,
if
but
you
I don't
need.
think we've
Yeah,
emailed. We've been Facebooking, haven't we?
yeah. I can send it to you in the text, or I can give it to you now, or
Just
however you want
call
to
it
do it.
out to me now, because what I do is I have a folder for everybody who's been on the show.
Okay, it's Steve Stockton,
Hang on, just
and then the number is 81, Steve Stockton 81 at gmail.com.
Steve Stockton 81@gmail.com. Okay, one second. I'll just send you an email now, and then you can have it. I can get the Skype video out pretty soon, Steve, and then we'll do an audio rip as well. Hang on, the stream is stopped there. One second. Let me close down the broadcasting. Stop the recording. Sorry, there we go. I'll do the rest via email, Steve. I'll do an audio rip as well, and then the audio rip will go into the MP3 archives for Capricorn Radio, and then I'll get that out to some live shows in America as well. I've got 3 networks in America, one in Spain, one in UK, and one in Ireland. So that'll all happen on a little spider network soon after, but I'll just give you all the links as I get them, Steve, yeah?
Okay, sounds great.
I'll stick the Amazon links in the Capricorn members page as well. I'll stick those.
Okay, I appreciate that as well.
Finally got there, Steve. Great to talk to
Yeah,
you.
it took a couple of false starts before we finally got
Yeah, I
together, but
appreciate the
I
patience.
hope it was worth the wait.
It was indeed. Of course it was.
Definitely.
we are going to be talking to Mr. Steve Stockton, author of Strange Things in the Woods. Before I bring Steve, the author, on today, let's talk to my new co-host, Heather Osborne. Heather, great to have you on the show.
Hi, James. It's great to be here. I'm
Uh,
excited.
well, Heather has been a former guest on the show herself, and it's great to join forces with today, Heather. You excited about today's guest?
Sorry, what was that?
Are you excited about today's guest?
Yes, I'm very excited. I'm really interested to hear more about his background and how he got interested in all this. So,
Sure. Yeah, I guess this is your territory more so today, Heather. I know you're into some of this stuff as well,
right.
and your husband Gary. So
I realized that it's not, but observe a small child run out from behind the car, run across the road in front of the car, and I'm thinking that kid is going to get hit. This was a toddler, maybe only 2 years old, if even that. Runs down into our yard, and if you've ever observed real small children that have barely mastered the art of running, walking, when they start running, they will lose control and just simply crash and burn. Well, this child tripped, fell in our yard, and completely disappeared. I was about probably 100 feet from the spot. Our house was set about 212 feet off the road. I was in the middle of the yard. Did not take my eye off the spot.
wow.
Walked directly to it, thinking there's going to be, a kid in a hole or something. There was absolutely nothing there.
Did that not
And
scare you, Steve? You're not frightened?
it not so much as just like, that's not supposed to happen. Even as a child, I knew that wasn't right, and it wasn't so scary as much as it was just like, wow, there's something else afoot here. There are things, I'm not being told about or whatever.
Perhaps
Wow.
if that happened as an adult, Steve, maybe that.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm kind of out of my depth today, but a great book. I really enjoyed. A great book. I really enjoyed it. So let's bring on today's guest. Hi, Steve. You're very welcome to the show.
Hi, James. Hi, Heather.
Hi.
Hey, great to have you here, Steve. Steve,
Great to be here.
you have also a second book since we last spoke, More Strange Things in the Woods. So I'll refer to both books today, Strange Things in the Woods and More Strange Things in the Woods, the sequel. Steve, tell us about you. Tell us about this research, or it's more of a collection of stories from people you know, I believe. And it's not even so much research. It's you've got a personal touch to this, I guess. You're affiliated with the people. So I guess tell us how that came about, first and foremost.
No, I grew up in the woods of East Tennessee. I was a late in life, unexpected baby, so a lot of my parents' friends were considerably older people. So when we went to visit, I would encourage the older folks to tell all the creepy stories, the tales about boogers and haints and things, if you will. And just there's a great oral tradition in the South, but a lot of people were somewhat reticent to talk about some of these stories just because they are so odd. So through that encouragement and through which the majority of these tales are from friends and from family members, just carrying on in the great oral tradition of the South, I've happened to write them down, and which I consider myself fortunate to be able to do. Otherwise, these tales could have died with me, and now at least they'll live on in some format for other people to enjoy and ponder and wonder about.
Sure. I believe you got a paranormal event, if you want to call it that, in your childhood. Tell us a little bit about that, Steve. I think this is really interesting. This is quite hitting home for you, this one.
I'm assuming you're talking about the ghost story.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I've talked about that one on some other shows. Yeah, I saw my first ghost when I was 6 years old. Full body apparition. We lived out in a semi-rural area in East Tennessee. I was playing in the yard waiting for one of my neighbor friends, and by neighbor, he lived about a half a mile away, waiting for him to come home. Lived at a T intersection, like an upside down T, and I see a car coming down the hill. I'm thinking it's my friend. When it stops at the intersection,
That would scare you, or that would scare the average person as an adult, I
yeah,
think.
it scares me now to think about it.
In
Right.
retrospect.
Yeah.
Heather, do you
Yeah.
want to jump in for a question, Heather?
Yeah, so early on, then you were open to the possibilities of these experiences then, if you were 6 years old. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's when it started, and I'd had some similar experiences before that, but nothing that had quite the impact that did of actually seeing a body, a person.
So were the stories amongst your family and the neighbors and friends, were these common occurrences where you lived, where it was kind of more the norm to experience these things?
Sometimes I wonder if it wasn't more prevalent in the area. This The majority of the tales in the first book are in the East Tennessee and some of the foothills of Middle Tennessee around Fentress County, out near Nashville, in that area.
Right.
So I don't know if it just happens to be more occurrences in that area or if I was just tenacious and dragging those stories out of people. Like I said, everybody
Yeah.
wasn't ready to tell their story right away. Some of them I had to kind of drag it out of them with a log chain. And I think that was